Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Podcast 1600, where we discuss historical events and literature pieces that relate to us in a modern day. This discussion is led by honor students of 9th grade English, myself, Abby O'Connell, literature enthusiast.
Me, Evan Fierda, literature expert.
And Braga, the mediator.
Today in our discussion, we're going to be following 4 questions that will lead us into our main driving idea for today. How do we recognize when control becomes excessive or dangerous in a modern day setting? Our first question will be, do people in society want control? Our second question that we'll hit on is, why do kids not want to come to school every day? Our third question will be, is following a passion a kind of freedom? And our fourth question will be, is technology impeding or improving education? To help move our discussion along today is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So we're going to use this book as an example to help us answer our first question, do people in society want control?
I think some people in society want control, because the whole reason the book's burning started in the book was because a majority of the population wanted to equalize education. But some people like Clarice and Montag and Faber, they rely on these books for freedom, in a sense. And they need that to think freely and not follow what the government wants them to think. So I think people in society want control to a certain extent. They don't want it to be excessive or dangerous to any people in the...
I can agree with that, because without control, things would be chaos and people wouldn't follow a certain path in life, which could be good for everyone on the world.
So branching off that control, why are so many people our age, like high school students, forced to come to school if they don't want to? Why are they upset about that?
I think this is because kids don't like learning the things that they are taught in schools. They would much rather prefer learning what they are personally interested in. I think they feel things like, what's the point? When learning about things that they feel will never help them in real life, like multiplying polynomials or knowing the difference between endothermic reactions and exothermic reactions. Other things involve too much pressure to do good, which affects your future. And there are many rules that kids have to follow, and it feels like you're being herded around like cattle from room to room for multiple hours, 5 days a week. It's all about grades and not what will actually help us in real life. Kids want to learn things that they are passionate about, so how can we support people who want to learn these things?
I feel that within schools, we're seeing more and more online classes and just more freedom and diversity within classes. And I feel that if students were given free time to, let's say, use the internet to mow around and search up topics that they're interested in, or even in class, if they want to break off and learn more about a certain topic that they're learning about, I feel a teacher should nurture that, and our school should just, as a community, we should just encourage this.
I feel like the whole point of exams and only learning information just to regurgitate it is kind of unhealthy for students and everybody else in society, because you're not going to retain any of that. You're just learning it just for the sole purpose of learning it.
Yeah, I find it interesting. We spend so much time preparing for tests and quizzes almost every week, and then we spend a whole chunk of the end of our semester focusing on exams that we're not spending time learning about things that we want to learn about.
This kind of leads us to our next question. Is studying your passion a kind of freedom?
I believe that studying a passion is a form of freedom from control within schools, where we're set up to learn the same thing as everyone else, even how diverse we think we are. And since we have the materials, online classes, resources everywhere at our fingertips, I feel that we should be doing this at the moment. Passion is sort of a freedom in Fahrenheit 451, because we see in the book that people like literature professors aren't able to follow a passion that they used to have because books are banned. And by taking this away, they're sort of living a life with no purpose. They don't even want to live anymore. And people like Faber see this, and that's why they have to try so hard to memorize books, something that they love every day. But with all the technology in the book, such as seashells and all the TVs everywhere that people are so focused on, is this technology improving or impeding education?
I think technology is impeding education necessarily, because you don't have to carry around textbooks anymore, but you can use your laptop. But that might not help with certain things that need face-to-face contact to learn like if you need special help with a teacher or something like that.
I also find that certain pieces of technology can be a distraction for students when they're not used properly, which really brings in the whole passion thing. If kids are using their phones or something like that for what they're passionate about, and it's enjoyable to them, they'll probably want to come to school and do that rather than sit at home and do the exact same thing. So I feel like as a school, if we can let people do what they want to and learn about, I mean, to some extent, there has to be some control over that, or else kids will willy-nilly do nothing all day. But if we nurture some sort of passion in every kid, then I think we'll have better students.
Speaking of control, how can we recognize when control becomes excessive or dangerous?
I think that within our own school, I think we can recognize that control has become excessive or dangerous since our students aren't happy with what they're learning. We're supposed to be following a certain Common Core standard, which is a good thing because it makes sure that kids are all on some sort of equal learning field. But at the same time, if we expand, we branch out, I feel like everyone will be much more happier with this because they're doing something that they love. And when people do things that they love, it leads into having better jobs for the future. People can choose what they want for their future. And this is such a great thing.
To add on, I think that kids who are not learning what they want to and are being controlled to learn certain topics would appreciate if schools had a way to incorporate their passions into things they learned.
Final message to our audience is to the students listening to this to go above and beyond and try to educate yourself on things that you're passionate about. And to the teachers and administration listening to this, I encourage you to allow students to also go above and beyond and branch out about topics to learn about what they're passionate about.
And now a quick message from our sponsors.
Are you tired of your information being tracked by the government and your education systems being blocked and controlled? Well, download Socialist VPN, where you can get all of your information safely and securely through the internet.
Disclaimer before we start, today we will be dealing with some heavy topics such as the Holocaust and the Chinese Cultural Revolution today as points of our discussion. Welcome back to another edition of Podcast 1600. You are listening to the special second edition today where we're going to be discussing the memoir Night by Elie Wiesel and some other events in history such as the Holocaust that show extreme control and how it can relate to us today. This discussion will be led by the NHS Honors 9 students, Evan, our editor today,
Yep.
Raga, our mediator,
Yeah.
and myself, Abby, our literature and historical enthusiast. 5 questions that will lead us into our main discussion point today, which is how do we react when power is used to harm other people, and when do we need to step in? So our first question today will be, how do other events in history relate to the Holocaust? Our second one will be, why did German soldiers during this time follow their orders, even if it was morally wrong? Our third question will be, do people ignore excessive power intentionally, and why do they stay ignorant? Our fourth question will be, why are only certain historical events taught in schools, and why are certain books banned in schools as a form of censorship? And our final question before our main point at the end will be, will ignorance of past events make them occur again?
Our first question is, how do other events in history relate to the Holocaust?
Well, something unique about the Holocaust would be the amount of control and power that was needed before it could actually happen. And we see this again within history, and it could relate to us today with the power and control we see within our governments as something similar to the Chinese Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap of Faith. Something that isn't really taught in schools because it's sort of controversial. Now, in the book Mao, Unknown Story, it's revealed that during this cultural genocide, almost 72 million people might have been killed because the records aren't clear. But the government of China is sort of hiding this fact from the entire world because people don't want to know the truth. Similar to the Holocaust, Mao Zedong had a cult following almost like Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini. He had a really big impression on the young minds of students. And just like the Hitler Youth, there was the Red Guard. But even going further, these young students went about hurting and murdering any people who didn't believe in their new socialist ideas, such as elders and teachers and people higher up in power. And some of the propaganda that was given out during this time, which is considered the Little Red Book, a pamphlet to all ideas in this Chinese world, was the most read book in the world because over 1 billion copies were made and solicited to everyone. Public readings, airplane readings, and so almost like the Nazis, where certain propaganda was given out, whether it be posters and such, we see this today and it's almost a scary idea. Now, a quick disclaimer that doesn't really make these two events very similar is how in Nazi Germany and throughout Europe, Jewish people were sent off to ghettos, work camps, and extermination camps, and other unideal persons. But in the Chinese cultural revolutions, people who didn't believe in the new socialist views weren't sent off anywhere, and they weren't exactly targeted by the government. This was all the kids doing. They were the ones who were doing mass murders. They were the ones going through the streets and beating people. It wasn't the government. And so you can see how this government effective propaganda on the students to form their own clubs and groups is really psychologically mind-numbing, because it's so awful in a sense that you see how much their brains are affected and how power became truly excessive in this scenario. In a sense that the students were following what they were being told, but to another further extent, why did German soldiers follow their orders even if they were morally wrong?
I feel like German soldiers, they didn't notice anything wrong with it because they were born to parents who were raised under the Nazi regime, so they were being taught all of this through like Hitler youth camps and government programs. That was all they had available to them in their childhood. So they have these Nazis who don't realize that what they're doing is wrong, and they can't fight against it because there's millions of other people just indoctrinated as they are. So it's kind of this whole like system of racism and like ignorance, like government-sponsored ignorance,
So
in order to kill a group of people.
is pushing ideas on young students in their minds something that will change the future forever?
Yes, 100%, because children are the future, as you know everyone always says, and if you have people deliberately like influencing them through their government sanctioned programs in schools, that can't be good, especially if it's a horrible idea like Nazi racism.
Also, the children were used as for the bigger picture for Hitler because they were used to create an army that would eventually kill millions of innocent people.
So yeah, we can see here that it might not have seemed morally wrong to them because they grew up on these ideas.
Let's to our next question, which is, do people ignore excessive power intentionally?
Well, I think that if the problem doesn't affect them, they won't speak out for themselves. This brings us to a poem by Martin Niemöller. Quote, "Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." End quote.
I believe that people ignore excessive control because ignorance is bliss. And at the same time, people also don't realize this excessive control because they don't know what life was like before it. So when young minds face lots of propaganda, just like they did during the Holocaust, it's hard for them to decipher what is right and what is wrong, and almost like students during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they were pushed propaganda pieces and they just believed it and they thought it was the right thing. But there's another silent thing that is slowly killing the minds of students: censorship of books and certain historical things within schools.
So why are certain books banned, and why are only certain historical events taught in certain schools?
We don't want to look bad within the eyes of young students, such as in U.S. history classes, we don't talk about certain things because it makes the U.S. look bad. Certain schools in the South wanted to ban teachings in textbooks about slavery because, of course, it makes them look awful and villainous almost. And in a book like Anne Frank, some schools deemed it too depressing. And is that wrong? Because is the whole Holocaust in itself depressing? But it's an important topic that we need to talk about in schools so to not have it in the future. And this book banning isn't right because it hurts the minds of others, like young students, and that in turn hurts the future and limits free thinking. Will the ignorance of them make them occur again?
I think it's possible that this contributes to it, but it's not the only factor, as we need to realize the roots of these problems and how they came to be in like the past events, like the Holocaust, like Hitler's rise to power out of desperation of the people. So we need to realize those roots, and if we're repeating them, then something's definitely wrong. Like if we're starting to, round up people in the camps, we need to look back and see what went wrong and see how we can prevent it. And also, we can't even like go to that position in the first place. We need to have schools tell us the truth and not like adulterated versions of the past or anything, in order to this not happen again. That's like a very big part of it.
Yeah, well, we see this actually happening today. People aren't seeing the signs ahead of time with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the deaths of so many. With now North Korea has work camps where people come back barely alive and then they die because they're almost brain dead. And so it shows how if we ignore certain things, we can't see the issues later on. And within schools, there's usually some sort of power dynamic. Students respect teachers and authority. Authority may look down upon students because they're not as intelligent yet, because they're not older and wiser. Are our lesser thinking minds a result of ignorance to certain things in life that we're not being taught by schools? Which brings us to our main focus of today's discussion, which is how do we react when power is used to harm other people in a certain environment, such as one around us, like schools?
So I think in the past, the problem was that we did not react, especially through the tragic events of the Holocaust, before this even happened, when children were being forced upon the mindset of Hitler's beliefs and the child indoctrination into impacts of power. But where were we when that was being done? We didn't react. None of the adults reacted. I don't think anything was done.
And see, that's one of the steps into further power that's excessive, and then catastrophe afterwards is, first of all, a student mindset that is followed by many young people that's being forced upon, a really extreme leader who might not seem extreme to most people because they're promising good things, but has different intentions than what people believe. And then I think the next step would be trying to get these students to force ideas upon their parents, like we see in the Chinese Cultural Revolution almost. And so what we're being taught in schools goes back to our parents and really just reflects certain standards of teaching in our country and our state.
So I think one of the main things we can do if we realize like things around us are being censored, like important historical books or things on the internet that like prevent us from finding out truth and not like government lies, sanctioned for us. But I believe that if we see any of these things happening, we need to like prevent them, because if we don't, then they have a lot of power over the future generations and how future generations perceive us as a whole.
That I do believe in that, because within schools, of course, we don't see certain things. That's the truth. And so it's hurting us because so many people are ignorant to these certain facts of history and books. So if we're staying ignorant to certain things, that's truly up to the school and the district and the state for setting up common core standards of education. So if we want to tackle these issues of censorship, we have to take it up to the next level where we go against sort of the school and then the district and then the state.
All right, thank you all for listening. This wraps up our discussion. We hope you think for yourself, and never mind, I ruined it.
Thank you for listening to our special edition of Podcast 1600. We hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.